Hey guys, so I thought that I would do a video about different shows that I've watched and how they've related to some of the topics that I talk about when it came to like character development. Because I think that each of us goes through our own character development. I think, nobody really knows exactly. I guess there are a few, that may know exactly what they want to be when they grow up, but I think a lot of us learn as we go. And it's about taking life's lessons and the choices and decisions that we've made and then evolving our character into who we want to be. So I had spent years not really watching movies. My girls used to joke like, "Mommy, you can't just sit down and watch a movie," because I'd get up and start doing laundry and get up and clean something, and it takes a lot for me to like sit down and really get immersed in a movie. But I had done that since I moved to the place where I live now and started paying attention to like the whole story and character plots and stuff. So the first was the show Arcane. And I know I couldn't believe that I had not watched it by the time I did because a lot of people knew once I told them, like, have you seen that show? They were like, yeah, of course we have. But since I had not, I was pleasantly surprised. But that show has like so many archetypes in it for the way that people could view themselves. And I think they did a wonderful job of it. But I think the main story around it was around the two sisters. And I explained to the person that I was with at the time, like, I feel like both of those sisters sometimes because I felt like the younger sister, for those of you who haven't watched it, it's this the parents die and a mentor, bartender guy that used to have a crush on the mom takes the girls, as his own and takes care of them. But there's a younger sister, Powder, and she's one of the main characters as the show goes on, and she's kind of that little rebel, a genius, but kind of, I don't know, wants to be like her older sister and wants to do all of the things, realizes she's not as big as everybody else and not as strong, but it's her older sister that tells her that she can. And so she wants to join in on everything, and at one point the older sister says no because the last time, something had happened and she messed it up, and she says, "You're a jinx," and leaves her behind. That scene really hit me because for the longest time, I had this feeling of like, please don't leave me alone to people. And I know that was, my fear of being alone for forever. I spent a lot of time grounded as a kid in my room. And, that was, I think parenting changes as generations go on. But, I used to say, like, there's a reason that they use isolation as like one of the strongest punishments, even in our jail systems and stuff, is because, human beings weren't meant to be alone. Like, we're social creatures. And when you're left by yourself, you're just left with the thoughts in your head, the feelings that you're having. And if those are negative, then that just stays with you. And so I told the person I was with, like, I felt like that a lot. When you leave me, and you say, like, the reason that I'm leaving you is because of you and you're horrible, then I feel like that character, that the younger sister Jinx. Like, you leave me behind and say everything is my fault, and then I'm left with that. And slowly, I got to be fine with being by myself. Sorry, guys. Like a whole house, just like when I had him downstairs, like a whole house, and he just wants to be like right in front of the camera on the desk. So, Sorry, he's probably going to do that. Um, but so I just felt like, that I feel like that character, that all that keeps going through my head is like everything's my fault. You know, the reason you forgot something, the reason that you're ignoring me, the reason that everything is my fault. I'm the jinx. I'm the problem. And so it changed me, just like in the show, it changed her. A lot of people may have thought like, everything about her is bad because she ends up the main villain guy kind of takes her under his wing and takes advantage of her. But you can see in there where there's still good in her. And her main wound is that she feels abandoned by the only family that she thought she had. And and then the older sister, I had had moments in my life, even with my own kids, where, because of whatever had gone on, I would lash out, or to people that I would lash out, say things that I regretted later, or that, I didn't mean in that particular way. But the wound was there. And the older sister, Vi, her main wound is not only losing her parents and losing her sister because the bad guy takes her sister away, but she spends the whole time trying to get back to her sister, trying to prove to her, like, I didn't mean to say that. I didn't mean to leave you there. I didn't mean to hurt you like that. And can't you see that, I've come back for you? But it's like all these instances keep happening where each one of them thinks the other one's out to get them. And they clash. And in the end, spoiler alert, in the end, they do come back together and the love is there that they had. But I saw myself in so many of those characters that I said, that show was so excellent in the way that they had beautiful music, beautiful artwork. It was so much more relatable to me than even some of the real world stuff going on because it showed human emotions within the animation that they did. It showed the real struggles between the rich and the poor. It showed the struggles of guilt, feeling guilty for things with each of the characters and their own wounds. And it showed dealing with all of those negative thoughts or negative feelings. And what really surprised me is the people that I talked to, I said, well, did you watch the whole show? And they usually stopped watching after the first season, or they lost interest after it got to the redemption part in the second season. And that was beautiful imagery too and stuff. But I just thought, like, so are some people it's just entertainment? Because I've always been the person of there's always a deeper meaning to things. Like everything I did, everything I said, every gift that I gave, there was always like deeper meanings to things. And I would say, the first is more action packed and drama filled, and the second does a lot of redemption stuff. And so I thought, like, maybe some people, they just don't, after all the gunfighting and all that is over, they lose interest. But so that was something in character development that, I said in my own relationship where I was like, you've made me the jinx. You say that, where I'm sure they thought they were the jinx. But I would say, like, I feel abandoned and you left me behind. And every time I think that, you're coming back, then you leave again. And so, that abandonment wound opens up again. And after, 100 times, then my trust is in, like, I don't trust you. Like in the show where Jinx eventually tells her sister, like, I don't trust you because you keep bringing this person in that I think is after me and gonna get me. And, they don't see me as the powder. character. But sorry, guys, I'm getting over a cold. Um, but for those of you who haven't watched it, go watch it. Like that is one show that I don't think that they could do a remake and make it better or, other things. I know I was just as disappointed as everybody else when they said that's it, 2 seasons. But for me, I was like, that was just a beautiful piece of work that those people did in all the characters, from the way that, they discovered magic, and then a lot of people got greedy, let it go to their heads, and then it didn't become about the magic. It became about greed and trying to outdo each other. And the partnerships between, I believe it was Jace and Victor. I said, I felt like I was the one behind the scenes doing all the stuff, and another person was, in front of the cameras and taking all the credit and doing all the stuff and saying like it's us, while I'm like, yeah, well, all this stuff that I'm doing is causing me damage. And and I could see then again where I would get in the victim mind frame and then feel like the victim's in the story. And then I'm sure if the other person felt that way, then I was the villain in their story. And I think that happens a lot in any kind of relationships that people have. But the second show that I highly recommend was the show 3,000 Years of Longing. Me and my ex-partner had watched that, and it's a story about a lonely narrator, like writer, that travels, and she finds a bottle in, I believe, Istanbul, and unleashes a jinn, which is like a genie. And he grants her 3 wishes, but since she knows mythology and she knows stories and stuff, she's very careful with, selecting her wishes, or, and at a point even says, then I won't wish, because I know that there's tricks to it, or, and she likes his company because she was so lonely for a long time. And at first I said, that's how I feel. I feel like I've been traveling the world, moving from place to place, meeting people, but always feeling like, the storyteller of the places I've been and the people I've met and all that. But then once it got into the story about the jinn, and he starts telling her about his 3,000 years, his past, and how he had love and he lost love because somebody else took it, and he got imprisoned, and at one point, he said he felt like he was trapped inside the walls. He couldn't get out. His bottle gets stuck underneath. I believe it's in like a bathhouse. It gets stuck like underneath what do you call it? Like the rock floor or whatever. But so nobody can discover it and set him free after he was imprisoned. And he tells her, like, I just kept trying to talk to anybody. I kept trying to reach out to the person that I loved, but she couldn't hear me. And I kept trying to reach out to other people, but they were too busy, and there was other forces. And so I just spent hundreds of years, trapped inside these walls, feeling unseen and unheard, and like I was invisible, but I knew I wasn't. And the person I was with turned to me, and I had been crying, and he said, "Is that how you feel? Like that?" And I said, "Yes, that's how I feel." A lot of times when these long pauses go on, because the person that I was with was very avoidant and would shut down and not talk and just ignore, and would rather avoid any kind of confrontation, argument, anything. I said, that's how I feel. Like, I'm trying to reach out. I'm trying to talk to you. I'm trying to reach you. I'm trying everything, and you don't hear me. You don't see me. I know I'm not invisible, but I feel like I am. And, and then I talked about my job. I was like, and I keep trying to speak up and I keep trying, and nobody hears me. A lot of times I feel like, you know, nobody sees me. I'm just trapped inside these walls. And in the end, it comes to where, again, spoiler alert, well, I won't say everything, but I mean, she makes a decision that basically, because she wants him to be free. And it's just a beautiful story, and it leaves you with was that Jin real? Was he not? Did she make him up because she's a storyteller? But that was again how, sometimes if I tried to describe, this is how I feel, and it didn't make sense to people that I talked to or to the person that I was with, I would say, like in that movie. Like, I'm fully aware that that movie is make believe, but that's how I feel. That's where my feelings sit. And so I recommend that too. It's 3,000 Years of Longing, and it has, I can't think of the main female in it, but it has Idris Elba as the genie, and yeah, he's nice to look at. So, but it is a beautiful story, and they're very good actors. And I've always loved mythology and fantasy stories, and I guess that was being raised in the 80s where we had a lot of that with E.T., and I think that's why there's like a big rage with Stranger Things right now. And, a lot of that music in there is the same that we listened to growing up. But it was The Never-Ending Story, Labyrinth, all those. And, if you go back and watch those now as an adult, there's a lot of stuff in there that you miss as kids that you're like, that seems more realistic. I would tell people like, I love Star Wars. It's more realistic to me, Star Wars. Like, we're like in the middle of it. The good versus evil, the this side versus this side. Like, everybody thinks they're right and everybody's fighting for this. And, you know, um, the injustices and how greed gets to people and turns them against. If you think about Anakin, and greed turned him to the dark side, and he lost the love of his life, and he lost his children and everything else. And so, I mean, there's a lot of sci-fi stuff out there that I just think like, people go back and watch some of that instead of some of the stuff that's on TV, because that's more realistic to me than the shows. Like my ex-partner and I used to talk about like the shows we grew up on, like Family Ties and Cosby Show, and when something goes wrong and the kids get in trouble, and then everybody sits down and talks it through, and then they go for ice cream or the music plays in the background, and I was like, I'm calling BS on that. Like, where does that happen? That was not anywhere realistic. I think one of my first videos I made about this, where I said like shows like Roseanne were more realistic to me, that I was like, it is not realistic that they're playing some piano music in the background and the parents are like, it's okay and we understand and let's all go have ice cream and hug, and yeah, like, yeah, that didn't happen. Maybe it is now, I don't know, but um, and I would say the third show is actually one that the person I used to be with introduced me to. And I don't even think he saw the deeper meanings at the time, but I'm always one of those. Like, I used to watch Alfred Hitchcock when I was younger, and I'm trying to think of like Tales from the Dark Side, like mystery things, Ray Bradbury theater things, where I'd always be like the who done it, figure stuff out. Um, Usually, I think that kind of got on my ex partner's nerves because I'd be like, it was that person right there. And then when they showed, who the killer was or who the bad guy was, they'd be like, how did you know that? I'm like, well, it's obviously not that first person. It's obviously not the person they think it's gonna be. It's the person who's kind of in there and eager to know all the information, but suddenly they have more information. Like, it's sometimes it's the last person you'd expect. But I was like, I don't know, because I'm just paying attention not to who's talking at the time. I'm usually paying attention to the people around them, and how they're interacting, or, you know, um, I guess one of my I don't know if I'd call it a talent or a gift, and maybe it was being raised in trauma and stuff, um, or going throughout that in my life is like I was like I pick up on the things not said and the gestures and the how people are acting, the the different stuff besides what's just being said. Um, but so that the third show is called Cool World, and I don't remember when it was made, but we watched it a couple times, and it had Brad Pitt in it, and it starts with Brad Pitt like coming back from I I'm thinking war. I don't quite remember, but anyway, he's coming back from the military. Yeah, it's war, and meets his mom, and then they go on a motorcycle ride, and a crash happens, and then he ends up, his mom dies, and he ends up in the cool world, which is all animated, and in that, I just I kept saying this one I am going to give a spoiler alert, so but it's worth it if you go see it. Um, but in the very beginning of the show, it's like he has a flashback when he sees his mom lying on the ground after this accident. And then he goes into the cool world, and for a split second, you can see him turn animated. And then he turns back to Brad Pitt, the person. So he's like the one human person in this animated world. And he becomes, basically the cop of the place. And then it ends up being like, other people want to come in, and there's a writer that I believe is Gabriel Byrne plays him. And he's another human that comes in. But during that show, I just kept saying, like, this is so weird. It's so entertaining, and it's got a lot of music, a lot of animation, like beautifully done for when it was done. But it ends up being, I think, my view, at the end of it, where it's all Brad Pitt's creation. Like, he's the creator of the whole thing. Like, he made up this whole world in his head in order to avoid the guilt of killing his mother. And there's a character in it that, when he's animated, that really, really loves him, and you can tell, and he just keeps telling her, we can't be together. Oh, wait, I gotta go. I don't have time for you. I'll be right back. Just keep waiting, just keep waiting. And the Toon characters just, like, okay, later on, later on. And like I said, this one I am gonna spoil, so if you don't want to know, just shut off the video. But it's because, that's the love, that's the kind of love that he got from his mother, somebody who really loved him, and for who he was, and not for the work that he was doing, or didn't need him to do all those things. She just wanted him to spend time with her. And in the end, it becomes where he turns back into a Toon. And me and this person I was with had arguments over, I said, it's all in his head. He made it all up because he couldn't handle the guilt of killing his mother. You know, he made up this version in his head of all these tunes and this reason why he couldn't go back to the real world and he had to stay in the cool world and he had to keep them apart from each other and all this. And but if you go back, I said, if you go back to the very beginning, play it very slowly, pause it. You know, when he first drops into the cool world, he's that tune that he is in the end first. Like there's this brief thing of there's Brad Pitt's character as the tune, and then he goes back to the human being. And it's like, you know, that's where he was gonna go. But then he made up all this version in his head of why he couldn't, you know, and it shows Kim Basinger is like the sexy kind of vixen that teases him and everything. And I would say that that's like the feminine part, the intuitive part of Brad Pitt. Because they say that we all have masculine and feminine inside of us, and the feminine is the one that carries the intuitive part of us. And the whole time she's fighting she wants to be real, you know, and she wants to undo the gap. She wants between the cool world and the real world, and she wants to go to the real world and be real. And at the end, you know, they're all tunes. And I think it was an acceptance of his, of letting go of that guilt and, you know, sacrificing that part of him in order to finally be happy, you know, and he does get the girl in the end, and then I think the Kim Basinger character, which I think is probably the feminine part of him in his mind, you know, gets to be herself and be free. And so, but you guys, you know, go watch some of those, see what you think. It was just watching some shows that I said, you know, I guess for me, it's always been like my time is valuable. I'm always trying to learn something in whatever I'm doing, whether it's talking to people, watching a movie, playing a game, you know, even at work. My mind's always been the inquisitive, trying to learn, trying to look for deeper meaning. You know, I think that's why maybe sometimes people said I'm a bit much. But it's just funny to me how well, not even funny. It's just amazing to me how there's creators out there who create characters that are so relatable to so many of us. And yeah, I know that, you know, like any of the shows, I know I'm not a Jen, and I know I'm not that writer, and I know I'm not Jinx or Vi or any of those. But it was during those moments that I, you know, communicated to this person, like, right there, how that person feels. That's how I feel. I feel like that character. You know, I feel like what that character is going through, those feelings. But, and I could, you know, relate to, I feel that abandonment issue, or I feel left behind, or I feel, you know, like the villain, or I feel trapped in the walls. So if you haven't watched them, go watch them. And if you have any other shows that you think do some of that deeper meaning, you know, put them down there, because I'm always interested in amazing works of art, whether it's books or shows or any of that, to understand better character development. Because I know for me, I was, you know, thinking sometimes I'm the victim in my story, and sometimes I'm the villain, and sometimes I'm the vixen, and sometimes I'm the, you know, abandoned kid. And And for me, it's just been integrating all of those parts of me and knowing, I have all of those feelings within me and, like I said, integrating them into I'm a human being and I'm multifaceted and I know the strengths and weaknesses that I have. And, I'm going to write my own character and try not to be the villain in my own story, try not to be the villain in other people's stories, try not to be the victim. Just try to understand that I'm a human being doing the best that I can do each and every day. So, like I said, I hope this helps, and I will chat with you guys soon. If you like this, like I said, like it, comment if you have any comments, and if you like this video, there's tons of other ones in my playlist. Bye.